What's up, everybody? My name is Daniel Unmanageable, and welcome to another edition of Hard Knocks Talks. My camera is overheating right now. I left it in 4K, so if it dies again, I might have to go to just audio for a few minutes, and that's okay. We'll figure it out. Anyways, tonight's guest, Tracy Oman from Metrics Vocational, is a registered return-to-work disability management professional with focus on mental health. We are going to talk about disability management as it relates to addiction in the workplace. But first,
I spent 23 years living in addiction. 16 of those years, I worked as a Red Seal tradesperson in Saskatchewan and Northern Alberta. During that time, I made many mistakes and took more than a few hard knocks. I went from tradesman to business owner to hiding from gang members and dumpster diving. But with that lived experience, I've decided to try and make a change. I've dedicated my life to raising awareness and promoting change in the fields of substance use and psychological health and safety. So join me and my guests as we take off the blinders around mental health in our communities and at work and shine a light on what's working and what's not working in the fields of mental health and occupational health and safety. I'm Daniel Unmanageable, and I'll be your host, and this is Hard Knocks Talks.
you wanna talk about panic? Here, my camera got all out of adjustment now because I was flailing around trying to fix it. I think it's okay now. I got it adjusted. I got it to 1080p instead of 4K, so we're gonna try it out. And where's Tracy? Wait, here she is. Hey, Tracy, how are you?
I'm great, Dan. How are you?
Oh, well.
Other than technical problems?
Oh, God. It doesn't matter how ready you are. It does not matter. There are so many things that can go wrong that it would be weirder if something didn't go wrong. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the joys of live streaming. So all the mess ups are out of the way now, so feel free to be yourself.
Perfect. I like the sounds of that.
Okay, so why mental health disability management? How did you come to that vocation?
Actually, when I think about it, I had a conversation with my mom this morning, and she always said to me, she says, you've just had a heart for helping people. And I originally actually got into becoming a physical therapist many, many years ago. And I had an injury of my own, and it was a mental journey as much as it was a physical journey as I recovered. And I broke my wrist. And as a physical therapist, it was absolutely damaging to my ability to work and my mental health. And I realized that there was more to injuries than just the physical aspects of it. And so that took me into vocational rehab and disability management. And I've had the pleasure of helping people along their journey of recovery. I've lived in Saskatchewan majority of my life, and are on the edge of Alberta. And I've worked with oil and gas and mining sectors. And so the mental health challenges and addiction challenges that we see through disability management are profuse. And I absolutely just want to be able to help them in their journey. So.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about disability management. What is that?
Well, disability management is different depending on who is referring to the topic. If you're referring to it as an employer hosting a disability management program, it is either hosted in-house or it can be actually outsourced. And in essence, what it is can be ranging from prevention of illness and injury and workplace accidents to assisting people to remain at work, or to actually assist them to return to work after an illness or being off of work.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned there, so disability management, can it be administered proactively?
Not only can it be, it really should be. So
by definition, it sounds like it should be. Yeah, you're managing it, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. The challenge is that we know that prevention is key. And unfortunately, so by the time we're talking about being proactive, we're already halfway through the journey. If we can prevent injury and illness, that's where we really want to start. The opposite of proactivity is being reactive. And so that means something has already happened and we're having to deal with the consequences of it. So wherever possible, disability management should always be preventative and proactive for sure.
right. So what would a proactive disability management program look like as it relates to mental health and addiction?
Yeah. Some of those in particular, I would say, and there's a real good body of research in regards to the impact that it can have on prevention as well as just reduction, is workplace culture and transformational leadership are key. We see those as being critical with regards to mental wellness, and in addition to subsidiary parts of a disability management program like stay at work and return to work assistance. But really, honestly, the workplace culture and transformational leadership is where we see the most ability to change.
And like what kind of things would you see in a healthy workplace culture?
With a healthy workplace culture, really what we should see is open transparency, respecting of diversity. Workplace culture is really how the workplace is, their beliefs, the way they roll. One workplace compared to another is never the same. But honestly, looking at spending more than 60% of our waking hours in our workplace, it really does have an impact on our abilities, our social, our mental, our physical abilities, and our overall well-being. So taking care of that at the workplace is so important. One of the other things I would add is just the importance of training on diversity awareness and training on disability management as being part of workplace culture.
Now, when you say diversity, and we had a good conversation about this the other day, was actually quite enlightening. When I hear diversity, there's a I'll be honest, there's a stereotype in my head. Like we hear diversity so much as it relates to ethnicity and cultures and things like that. But you use that in a different way to describe people that might have a disability.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly diversity, all inclusive, does include all aspects of social and ethnic groups for sure, various different, genders and sexual orientation and religions. But one of the things that from a disability management perspective that is, I believe, often overlooked when we think about kind of inclusivity and in diversity is individuals with disabilities. So while we may not interchange the two words, disability definitely needs to be part and inclusive of a diverse population in the workplace.
And you mentioned transformational leadership. Now, what does that look like?
Transformational leadership is just really leaders listening. If we were to really, really simplify it, leaders who have a growth mindset, leaders that are wanting to change tomorrow to make things better. So again, when we talk about making change and your intro, Dan, when you're talking about, your passion to change, that's where it changes, is within the workplace, is the leadership. And so looking at leaders who have an authentic vision of listening to their staff and what needs to change. Absolutely.
And finding solutions with their existing challenges.
Absolutely. And just not disregarding or passing by, but actually taking them seriously, being very authentic about what needs to change and actually making effort in a growth mindset sort of way.
So you've said growth mindset a couple of times now. When you say that, what do you mean a growth mindset?
They really need to think about how can they grow, how can they change, how can they make things better. So if I'm, I think this is good and I'm going to just stay that way, and it's not working, then it can be very, very troublesome for all the staff inclusive, right? But someone who's willing to make that change and break the mold and have a mindset of growing beyond where they're currently at.
Okay, cool. Where are we here? So let's see. How does all of this relate to substance use at work?
So I think the best way to approach answering that, Dan, is just in regards to thinking of it as a diagnosis. So let's take diabetes, for example. Alone, the diagnosis is not a disability. And so when we look at substance use alone as a diagnosis, whether it be alcoholism or substance misuse, what have you, alone it is not a disability. So how we define disability is when an individual is no longer able to perform the functions that are required of them, whether it be in the workplace, of course, is what we're talking about, or in a home setting, right? But that's what defines. So there's this misnomer that having a diagnosis means that you're disabled. And that is absolutely not true. We can have all kinds of diagnoses, but not actually be disabled from them. So really starting to change, again, we're talking about the mindset, Dan. We really need to change our mindset. Simply because someone is struggling with maybe their diabetes or maybe their substance use or what have you, is it actually making them impaired to a point that it's no longer safe for them to be in the workplace? Perhaps. But if it's not a disability.
Okay. So can you give us some examples? Like I'm interested to hear how, like perhaps somebody using medication or medicinal marijuana or something like that. Do you think that it's possible for them to perform safety sensitive functions?
It really depends. That's a wide open question for sure. From a perspective of what are their actual job demands, and is it putting them or anyone else at risk, or for operational costs? As far as is there a risk involved? I think disclosure is very, very important. But I would actually like to share a story with you of a client that I had, and I think it will really kind of help to tell the tale of the challenges that individuals face. I'm gonna call this client Annie for her protection of her privacy. And she was a very young youth care worker, and she had a history of substance misuse, and she had her own trials, and she recovered from that being a problem in her life. And when she was hired to this employer as a youth care worker, they both mutually agreed that it actually would be an asset for her because she's going to be working with challenged youth, right? And so it was an opportunity to share her story and for other youth who were struggling to be able to benefit from that knowledge. But as it happens, our workplaces are not always balanced. And so in her instance, there were other people who had left due to medical reasons, and the work just kept mounting and mounting and mounting on her to the point that she no longer had that work-life balance. And so from that, she ended up having impact to her social relationships, which then led her to turn to substances again to try to cope. And with that, she was still, however, able to perform her job. So while she was using substances, she was still functioning. So then fast forward 11 months, and now the story is that she had shared her use of substance because she felt an ethical responsibility to be honest with her employer. And she shared it with her manager, which then precipitated a call from HR, which precipitated a meeting, which was an immediate dismissal, which was not appropriate because she was
nor legal.
Right. But she was still functioning. And the moment she was dismissed, she had a panic attack. She went to her doctor. She was diagnosed with panic disorder, general anxiety disorder, then came major depression. And by the time I see her 11 months later, she's very, very disabled because of her mental health, all because she thought she was doing the right thing. And so I think there's such an awareness, going back to talking about diversity awareness and disability management, it's important that managers and supervisors get trained on how to handle those situations rather than being a part of the problem. We need to make sure that because in and of themselves, maybe that manager thought they were doing the right thing for protection of everybody, but they need to be educated and they need to be trained as to what to look for and how to help those people she was inherently just looking and asking for help in essence, right? And it ended up just spiraling her to the point that it was a major time away from work and a major recovery process for her simply because she was honest. in
Yeah.
disclosing it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back when I was in my active addiction, I was fired from several companies based on my behavior. I didn't self-disclose. They just thought I was an idiot and fired me, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying though. If that awareness training was in place, and the term that's been rolling around in my head since I started my education in my safety certification program is a recovery awareness or addiction awareness certifications for companies as a part of a safety management system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would certainly like to see something like that. I know it doesn't exist right now, but
Mm-hmm.
you know,
And going back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning, what is disability management? And it's often a program, but there's no defined criteria that make up a disability management program. But to be able to turn the corner and help people, like in this instance, there was an opportunity for everybody to win and nobody to lose. If the employer had been educated as to how to help her, how to actually get the support that she needed. Maybe there was an accommodation. Maybe there was more of a close monitoring that needed to occur. There was a lot of different opportunities. There's a kind of a duty to inquire is what it's called, where an employer they have a duty to inquire with that individual if something is not dismiss them. And so there's a whole body of opportunity out there, and it starts with knowledge and power, right? From knowledge comes power, right? Is to be able to make changes. Yeah,
absolutely. So as a disability management professional, what do you do when you see a substance use challenge come across your desk?
Well, I will be very honest. I manage a team at this point. And so I will tell you what I tell my team is that you need to put your personal biases at the door. So when I was doing consulting myself, I was taught many, many years ago is that my personal bias can influence how I act, how I behave. And I've carried that with me through my entire career.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my very first thing that I tell people is that perhaps they have had a bad experience with someone who has an addiction issue or substance use or what have you. And so that's number one for me is they need to put their personal biases aside so they can look at that person as a complete individual without any kind of prejudice to start with initially. The second piece of it is to allow that individual to tell their story. So having an interview, talking to them, hearing, all we get is paper. We get paper from either an employer or an insurer to understand what's going on. But what is their perspective? Let them do the talking. Let them tell their story. And so that we understand their perspective. And at the end of that interview, in essence, what we're trying to do is a functional gap analysis where we're really looking at trying to understand, what are the medical factors at play here? What are the non-medical factors? What's the functional gap from this individual being able to move forward successfully? But ultimately, whether it be a substance use case that crosses my desk or someone with fibromyalgia, I need to treat them equally the same at the outset, that they are an individual and remove all personal bias. Yeah.
Right. So take the stance of the reasonable person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I say that in quotations because that's going through my law and ethics course. What is that even? Can you define what the reasonable person is? Because that changes. That is completely circumstantial and ambiguous.
Yeah. Well, and we talk a lot about that in case law. We look at case law on a regular basis and how individuals are impacted at that level. And they always talk about the reasonability factor. Absolutely. Yeah.
Reasonable reasonable practicability.
Yeah.
So we were talking about gap analysis the other day when we were talking about how disability management professionals handle these situations. Tell us a little bit about how a gap analysis can affect the way you handle a person struggling.
So when we look at a gap analysis,
and what is a gap analysis? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When we talk about a gap analysis, we're looking at what is the individual's job demands, or what are they required to do to function in that particular space. And then we look at what are the medical factors that are impacting this individual from not being in that workspace right now. So what is a limitation? What is a restriction? What can we work with, basically? What could be an accommodation? What could we, from a substance use, is there more of a closer monitoring? As an example, some nursing programs, we have kind of a buddy system of mentorship after an addiction, where there can be some accommodations in place versus a hard and fast restriction. The other side of that is the non-medical factors, which, as you know, are plentiful, right? So the psychosocial factors that come into play. So are there other factors within relationships at home? Are there actual issues within the workplace that are non-medical but are huge, right? So there? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I have to say this or I'll forget. Do you ever see stigmatic influences work their way into a gap analysis?
Do you mean from the consultant's perspective, or more from the influence of other stakeholders?
Well, it could be, it could be from any stakeholders, like from the coworkers up to the people conducting the analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say the very first thing when a file crosses my desk, you need to put your personal biases aside, because we're human, and that's how we're wired, and our belief system embeds very deeply in how we do our work. And so absolutely there are stigmas, both from admittedly from a consultant's perspective, if we're not willing to kind of put our biases at the door, and or from the employer. One of the things that we've, like as an accommodation, Dan, to give you an example, is so someone coming back after a mental health or an addiction is to have some education shared with the rest of the team of this individual, and perhaps
like coworkers and things like that.
Where appropriate, right? Again, maintaining that individual's privacy with respect to their condition, but looking at how to assist, and support that individual coming back, right?
And that can be tricky with the privacy laws right now. I mean, the employer, if we want to get technical about it, the employer is not even allowed to know, why these accommodations are being put in place, like why this person can't come, like we were talking about perhaps methadone or other maintenance programs like Suboxone. Many people have to go to the pharmacy every day. So that would require a late start or an early finish. And the employer is not allowed to know why.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the only time that I've ever in my career ever experienced where I've shared with someone who's been on the employer's payroll is an occupational health nurse or an occupational health physician, where they've actually they're employed by the employer, and that particular arrangement, employee-employer arrangement, is where the employee has already signed that they have given consent for them to know. But it is those individuals in those power of privileged information, those nurses and doctors do a fantastic job of keeping it appropriate. But it's still, in order to get buy-in from an employer, knowledge is part of it. And so when we say, well, we need these limitations met through this accommodation, sometimes there's a harder buy-in simply because they don't understand why. And then a bias can enter the equation,
Absolutely. So now if there's a occupational health nurse on staff, now they get this privileged information, but they're not allowed to disseminate it, correct?
No, they would disseminate it in a very similar way as we would, right? So from a language around limitations and restrictions, what can they and can they not do? And looking at, meeting those limitations through trying to mitigate them through accommodations. What can we change about the workplace? What can we change about the duties, the schedule? Is there a different job that we could temporarily have that individual do? Versus a restriction is a hard and fast, basically, no, we can't go there. But yeah, the OH&N or occupational health physician, simply they would abide by the same kind of rules of privacy that we would.
So when somebody is off of work on a treatment plan and they are returning to work, why is it favorable to get them back in the workplace as quickly as possible? You know, like, because some people would think, oh, well, wait until they're completely recovered, so to speak. Now, the argument is still out whether people actually ever completely recover or not, but that's another show. But yeah, like, why is it favorable to bring them back before they are completely recovered?
Yeah. Well, if I could be kind of geek out on you a little bit, Dan.
Please do.
The workplace research that we have today, I've been in the career for 25 plus years, but the workplace research we have today is incredible compared to when I first started in the profession. And it tells us that the greater chance of success is the earlier. So we talk about kind of a magic window of 12 weeks, that within that first 12 weeks, that's the best time for an individual to be supported actively, to be able to have the greatest chance of success in returning. Then we go into the statistics that, 6 months, there's only a 50% chance that individual is going to return. You add a year to that, it reduces by 20%. You add another year, another 10%. So 2.5 years post work absence, we could be looking at an 80% chance of them not returning to work. And so when we talk about the stats, and yet we realize the health benefits, there's a whole piece of work by a lady by the name of Dame Carol Black out of Europe, and she's absolutely phenomenal with her concepts about good work is healthy, or health, work is healthy. And we know all the benefits. We know that we achieve so much more by having a healthy workplace that we're at. So not only is it that early return is important, but it's actually important for our overall well-being.
Okay. So how do you think that legislation is holding back progressive disability management?
There's limited legislation. If we were to be really kind of frank and honest, I think, like, as I just said, the workplace research that we have now, we've fast forwarded and made such headway. But again, there's so much work yet to be done. So I think it will follow. But at this point, we have the Canadian Human Rights Commission that basically really stands on the duty to accommodate clause.
It's a broad stroke.
It's an incredibly broad stroke. And it's, this qualifier that says to the point of undue hardship, but that's defined case by case. It's not defined on any particular strong criteria like health, safety, and cost, but
it's right up there with the reasonable person.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So it's lacking. I think you've studied this. You've just recently, finished your course, and you're probably much more on top of that knowledge than I am, to be honest. And it's not there. I think it will follow. It has to follow in order to support our workplaces in the future, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I believe it is Regulation 12 of the OH&S Regs 1996 in Saskatchewan. It basically says the employer has a duty to provide a safe and healthy workplace, and that's as close to that as we get.
Yeah, and I mean, it's honestly, the duty to accommodate, it means something different to probably each person and each employer, like what they feel is expected of them. So I think one of the things I have found as an inroads with employers is, again, going back to education, help them to understand what that means for them, help them to understand that most accommodations cost less than $500 when we're talking about kind of basic things to put in place. Accommodations help them to not have to pay in recruiting and staffing changes and bringing on new staff. So accommodations are very financially rewarding for an employer, but they don't see that at the outset, right? But through education and support, I think that can come over time.
Yeah. Can you give us an example? And I don't know, sorry if this comes out of left field, but Can you give us an example of what undue hardship might look like in a substance misuse situation?
Hmm.
from
um,
the stance of the reasonable person.
yeah,
And
from
go.
this time. Absolutely. I think the thing that comes to my mind that is probably to the point of undue hardship that an employer's position would take is often related to safety sensitive activities, right? So, and we deal with that with medications. And I know, we're talking about addictions and mental health, but in and of that, not close and not far off is chronic pain, which impacts mental health, which then impacts chronic pain. And the medications that individuals may be taking for chronic pain can sometimes be very similar to the ones that they're taking for mental health and the impact that that can have. So again, honestly, I do think that it's about educating. I have a client right now, a file that I'm aware of where a man is very capable and has been on this medication for a very long time, but we had to jump through every hoop in order to get him cleared from the medical side of things to prove that he's actually capable to perform those safety sensitive duties. So I think it's, really advocating for our clients as well, to making sure that, when we know something is actually not going to put them at risk, the employer and or them or the coworkers, we really do need to try to mitigate that gap that an employee on their own doesn't necessarily have the knowledge or the power to do anything about.
Can you, now I don't know, maybe this is sensitive information, but I'm going to ask anyways, and you can just say no. How did you prove that he was capable of these safety sensitive duties?
Mm-hmm. So he actually is seeing a chronic pain specialist, and that specialist who had prescribed the medication was the one who made the ultimate decision that he was safe. But when you first start a medication, and I certainly do not profess to be the expert in this space, but my humble knowledge is when you start a medication, there is an adjustment period, exactly, where eventually, once a person kind of reaches their steady state on the medication and they are demonstrating the functionality to do safety sensitive things like driving a vehicle and such like that, then absolutely there's enough knowledge there for a specialist to make a decision about the well-being of that client while on the medication. The comparison was being able to operate a particular type of machinery was the point in question that the employer had.
Is there anything in place to prove someone is fit, like while using a medication?
That's a good question. It's not like a regimented sort of assessment that they would go through. And case by case, absolutely. I can remember cases in the past where, people have been on, as they're recovering from addictions and mental health challenges, they've been on some pretty heavy medication, and it was not appropriate for them to go back to the workplace at that point in time because of the variability and, the response to the medication wasn't yet stable.
Yeah. So safety trumps everything, really. It should,
It should. Yeah.
And it's terrible that people go through these kinds of things, but at the end of the day, if they're on a mind altering substance, whether it be medicinal or not, we don't want to kill anyone,
Yeah, and it's ultimately the risk is there. So, and I didn't mean to make light of it earlier when I was talking about sort of the the diabetes versus alcoholism. But actually, as a clinician, I worked side by side by a active alcoholic for better part of a year, and I was not aware of that because she demonstrated functionality. It was only when it turned the point from being a substance use to a point that it did become a disability that it was evident to the rest of us. So it is again, yes, the substance use is definitely a challenge. And it is hard, like you say, to kind of define at what point it becomes. But really, it comes down to the litmus test, if you wish, is are they or are they not able to safely perform their job demands?
Yeah. We've got some comments rolling in. We're going to get to them here.
Sure.
Yeah. First, we've got Brenda. Thank you, Brenda, so much for joining us tonight. And I am sitting here and I'm reading her comment and I'm like, what does DX mean? I really should know this. And I don't know what it means. Do you know what it means?
Diagnosis?
Oh, God. I'm really glad you know what that means. And I'm going to get shit from Brenda later for not knowing that. You watch. So Brenda says, say someone is diagnosed with a substance use disorder and the substance abuse professional recommends inpatient treatment. The wait list to get onto government-funded treatment programs is 12 to 15 weeks. She goes on to say, do you think it would be beneficial for both employee and employer to fund treatment or the insurance companies to step up?
That's a good question, Brenda. Again, it comes down to, so when we kind of look at who's responsible, it comes down to, so an insurance company, their liability is when someone is quote unquote disabled, so no longer able to perform that role. So if in fact that individual can't remain in the workplace because they're disabled because of the substance use disorder, then absolutely an insurance company will at times, if their liability is for that, they may have consideration for that. As far as an employer, it depends on, again, their disability management program. Sometimes employers actually do all of that in-house. So for that first kind of preliminary short-term period, they may actually cover all of those costs, including the continuance of someone's salary. So it's quite variable depending upon how that's structured. But do I think it should be? Yeah, absolutely. We have waiting lists every which way, right? If there's an opportunity to tap into, and I think sometimes, Brenda, people don't know what's available. So inquiring, right? Again, every employer structure and employer's relationship with, a short-term disability insurer, they're all different. So sometimes we just don't know unless we ask. So I would say inquire.
So
for sure.
In listening to your response there, a question came to me. Is disability management sometimes intertwined with the EAP program of a organization?
Definitely. Yeah. And, certainly it's I would say like an arm of it, just like, the management and the labor piece need to kind of be there. The education piece needs to be there. The return to work and stay at work people need to be part of it. So again, when we started out, we talked about how if someone was to define disability management, I might define it very differently than the next person because it is such a varied scope of what we call disability management. But in essence, the goals are prevention, assistance to stay at work, and assistance to get back to work. And so whatever that means to that employer and how they've designed their program is then, so EAP is often a part of that.
So would disability management be under the EAP umbrella?
EAP would be under the disability management umbrella.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got another question here. We've got Chris Sanders. Chris, thank you so much for watching tonight. He's a fellow classmate of mine, actually.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, he's already landed work too. Congratulations on that, Chris. Chris says, would that professional who signed off on the worker using, would he be held liable if the worker was not found capable and an incident happened? Or is that on the employer?
That's a really good question. I would honestly say that I've never actually seen that. So I'm going to theoretically try to answer that question. It would be very difficult to discern, again, case by case, what's the actual injury, what's actually happened. Can it be traced back to the fact that it was a safety sensitive decision that was not able to be made because of the medication that this gentleman was on? So it'd be very, very hard to probably prove, to be honest. And would it come down to an injury that the employer would hold? probably most likely, I would think. But that's why the employer, in all fairness to them, they want to be 100% sure that that person is ready to come back. So we're not, certainly there's gaps within our ability to predict when someone's ready to go back. But for a specialist to give that kind of assurance, they're confident. Like there's really no suggested challenges, or they might qualify it and say, I've seen it where they'll say they can return to work, but for 4 hours at a period, versus say in this instance, this gentleman was going to go back to 10 to 12-hour days, and he still had no concerns with that. Right. So just, there might be variability in how a specialist would prescribe that limitation or restriction.
Okay. So I
hope that answers the question. It's a very theoretical question because I've never actually seen that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how I wrap my head around it is, if a doctor says, okay, this person can come back on this medication, and then something goes sideways and this person is involved in an incident, and post-incident urine test shows this drugs, that's actually really a good question. Would that fall back on the doctor? Because I mean, the employer is following the doctor's recommendations.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's probably a question I would say that's outside of my scope to really comment on. I'm not sure where that would land at the end.
I wonder if Brenda has something to say about that. Brenda knows a lot of stuff. Okay, well, she does have another comment here. Thank you, Chris, for the question. Appreciate you showing up and chiming in. Medicinal cannabis, where's the stand on that?
That's a very good question. I should have probably come a little bit more prepared for that one, because I should have known it was coming. It is employer specific to the sector that individuals are working in. So it usually falls into that whole safety sensitive qualification. Again, are they able to actually do that? There is some fairly hard and fast rules still within, especially the industries that I'm most familiar with, the oil, the gas, the mining, because of the risk that it does pose on the worker to perform safety sensitive activities, for sure. So as far as where the stance is, it's pretty firm yet. Are
you seeing a prevalence of marijuana use come across your desk since the legalization?
Definitely, it's been present for a while. I would say within sort of the last kind of 3 years, we've seen an increasing use of medicinal cannabis for our clients for a variety of different reasons. But it does definitely pose a new barrier because we, of course, can't disclose that to the employer either. So a real level of scrutiny needs to occur to ensure that that individual is actually medically safe to return to the workspace.
We've got Carrie just making a comment. I love reading Brenda's comments. Yes, Carrie, I think we all do. She is a very welcome part of our little community that we have here. Okay, what else do I have for you? I think that's just about it. Do you have anything that you would like to say tonight to anybody out there who might be facing these challenges in the workplace and not know how to address it?
I think the first thing that I would say is ask for support, or get support before. Like I shared my story about Annie, as I called her. She thought she was doing the right thing by sharing, and yet that disclosure ended up being nothing but a nightmare for her and probably for everybody, including the employer.
Did she end up back at that place of work or no?
She did.
She did.
She did.
That must have been an awkward first day back.
It was a very challenging opportunity, opportunity to, return her to work because the employer, I think she always felt a little bit, we monitored her for, I would say, probably a little bit longer than normal because she felt scrutinized, right? She felt like she was kind of under the microscope, for sure. Yeah, I think that educate yourself, above all things. Educate yourself. Find some support. Before you send that email disclosing information about your own personal, medical. Reach out and seek support, kind of personally or from your health professional. First of all, as to how best to approach it. Remember my little linkage about, having a diagnosis does not necessarily equate to being disabled. And the example I gave about a fellow worker, that she was functional until the point that she wasn't functional. So get the help you need. But I would honestly suggest is just really speaking to your healthcare professional. Family physicians they're absolutely phenomenal for having those types of conversations. And I think there's this, as you say, Dan, kind of a stigma about a lot of different things. There should never be a stigma about approaching your family physician about these topics. They are there to answer these questions, and they're the first gateway to go through, right? And I would certainly recommend them above your employer being the first person that you speak to. As soon as an employer knows something about you from your medical, they can't unknow that. They can't stop knowing that they have this knowledge, right? It's like once it's out, it's like
I'm going to tell you something, but I need you to not know it as soon as I tell you.
In the future. It's like, what do we talk about? The toothpaste, right? As soon as the toothpaste is out of the toothpaste tube, it can never go back in. So just be cautious about what you share. And I think, remember to, we have to be our own advocates in today's world. We talk a lot, Dan, about just education and making, finding out what your options are, and making sure that you're well versed in that before making decisions. Yeah, for sure.
We've got where's my little cursor? I got two screens, and sometimes my cursor gets lost on the second screen. I'm like, where did it go? Okay, so here we go. Loved what Tracy said about inquiring about funding for treatment. I know what TX stands for.
Yeah.
To the employer and the insurance company is a really good step for all involved. I could not agree more, Brenda. And I like what you said about going to the doctor first. I think that is a little piece of information that many people would not think of. Many people would just be like, I can't take it anymore, and just run into the office and be like, I messed up. So,
and I think it's important that you, and again, one thing I would suggest is that documentation that a physician does about how you're doing is very important for historical reasons, and that if you are feeling like you're struggling, go then. Don't go when you're already falling over and really feeling bewildered about what to do. Go early and seek the support.
It'll speak to your diligence for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that comes to the end, Tracy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. And
thank you, Dan.
And that's it. Have a good night, my friend.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Okay, let's go into the call to action. Okay, fostering change is our primary purpose here at Hard Knocks Talks. If you would like to contribute to ending the stigma around emotional pain, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Like and comment your thoughts on our posts. Let us not gather in an effort to showcase our leaders' shortcomings, as there are none among us without challenges. Oh no, I edited this wrong. Let us come together with our lived and living experience as a resource that has the power to engage new thought processes, to promote new ideas, to broaden the spectrum of care, and to show the world that the lie is dead. We do recover, and we are here to show you how. Good night.